Hey y'all, I'm Laura with Hot Fan Media, and today I'm going to be taking you through my process for recovering headliners. Let's get to it. Okay, so a couple things. If this headliner was just falling from the edges here, I would normally repair it with these fast tack pins. They've been really great here in the shop with a few of our sagging headliners, but they're really the best and they hide the best if it's in the edges, not when it's in the very middle. We didn't know that this headliner was sagging, and we had it drilled and extracted by Chrissy, our detailer. After that detail, it started sagging a whole lot. We are going to be recovering it instead of just repairing it with a few pins. To recover the headliner, obviously you need headliner material. It's going to have the color of your headliner and a foam backing. Obviously you can tell this is not the same color. This is just a piece of scrap. If you do a headliner recover and you've got some leftover material, this stuff is great for a lot of different uses, so it's good to keep around. Even though they're both gray, and even though on camera you might not see a huge difference, there is a huge difference between these two colors. This is a very light gray, and I would call this more of a slate gray. It's difficult to near impossible to find the names or the codes to these headliner colors. So the best you can do is match them as close as you can. And the best chance you have at exactly color matching your headliner so that your visors don't stand out is to take a visor off and physically go to an upholstery warehouse. But if you don't have one local, it is possible to match color online. It just won't be exact. That being said, these are very easy in two-door vehicles. They become more difficult when you have four-door vehicles. If you have a four-door truck that you're working on, it can also be a little bit difficult because you have to fold the headliner somewhat in half to get it out of the doors. It doesn't necessarily damage it, and you won't necessarily see a crease either when you put it back in, but it can be damaged if it cracks. So it can kind of bend, but if it cracks and breaks, you have to just replace that entire piece, and I don't even know where you find those pieces. I've just only ever recovered them. SUVs, anything with an extended cargo area, those headliners are pretty difficult to repair simply because they have to be bent, or in some cases with like a XL Yukon, you would have to cut that headliner into two pieces, and then you wrap the headliner around that cut area, and when you put them together there's a line, but it looks okay. But it's still a difficult undertaking because the headliner is so big. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble anymore. We're just going to get right into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the trim off from around the top of this headliner. Any lights that you have on your headliner, they're going to be holding the headliner up. As far as I know at the moment, I'm only going to be using two tools: putty knife, plastic brush. So everywhere where the headliner has separated, I think that's all right here, the foam backing is going to be attached to the board, but wherever the headliner stayed intact, we should be able to get the foam to come with the headliner. Oh, well, I thought it was going to pull nicely, but it's really only pulling at the edges, so we're gonna have to do some brush work. You wanna be careful right here. It's trying to pull the layers apart, so you kind of wanna hold on to it if it's trying to do that. So that's disappointing. This makes it much harder for us. So I've got my tools here. The reason why we can't adhere to this without scuffing it up a little bit is eventually this will separate from the board, and so it is not a good material to adhere to. So we're gonna need to do some work scraping it off. Okay, my tools weren't working as well as I wanted them to, so I'm going to try something a little bit more aggressive. You have to be super careful with this because we don't want to tear up the backing, but I'm just gonna see how well this does. Okay, so I'm liking this tool a lot. As you can see, it's a little bit patchy. That's fine, we don't care. This is all I care about. This will let go eventually, but this has been all scuffed up. is gonna do just fine. The way I've got this set up, you definitely have to have 2 people, 1 person to hold this because this is gonna really push it around. And it's definitely not easy to do one-handed. So thank you, cameraman, for holding our board. Boom, home stretch, finish the rest of this. Okay, so yeah, I think about 20 minutes to 30 minutes just to clear the foam off. And honestly, that is my fastest time because I've never used a drill before. The reason why I haven't used a drill before, and I'm not even sure if you can see it, but I have nicked the board in a few places, which I've done with other tools normally anyway. And they're not bad, these nicks, and they don't ruin the board or adhesion or anything like that. The only way that it could be like a bad deal if it had gone all the way through, that would be pretty bad, or if I had cracked or broken something. I haven't done any of that here. It did really well with all these fine details, so I'm happy with it. I think it's a safe method as long as you have some pretty solid upper body strength that with all these curves and stuff like that kind of tries to jump away from you a little bit. If you know of a faster way, you let me know in the comments. Let everybody else know too. But this is the way we did it this time. And now we're gonna move on to the recovering. Okay, so we've got our piece of headliner material here. I got it cut to pretty much the same dimensions. This is 1.5 yards, 60 inches long. But anyway, we are going to roll this out. And the first step is just gonna be to get a loose idea of how much we need, because we are gonna trim it, but we don't want to trim it too much. We want to get it laid out all nice and straight. You want extra hanging over, and what we're going to do is press it down into your creases, especially where it dips down really low. And we're going to make sure that we've got a good representation of how much we need, because when we go to glue it down, if you have too little, it's going to stretch, and you do not want it to be stretched. You want it to lay down nice and easy. So we're going to kind of pretend in this first step like we've already glued it down, and just to make sure it lays down real flat. And I don't know why this is buckling here. It shouldn't. It should be flat. I want to make sure there's plenty for all of our little gaps. You see how much that took from here? It's like about 1/2 inch. And we are going to trim it, but probably not in the way you're thinking, because I'm not going to trim this side. I'm just going to trim the other side. Just cut straight across, giving it a lot of extra inches to work with. We can always cut some off, but we cannot put it back on. Okay, and I already mentioned this before, but we're going to take this piece of scrap and fold it up, and it will get used on seat, foam, repairs, and stuff like that. We do not glue this down all at once. We glue it down in portions, and you want to start from a line. Spray my glue on this, and I'll spray my glue on this. You give it a few seconds, and then you're gonna lay them flat, and then that is going to be our first line, and then you go from here and pull it up and glue it down in that direction. And the reason why we do that is so that we can get a lot of control, because if I just glued the whole thing and like, oh no, now I've got this crease, it's not even. Yeah, that's why we don't glue the whole thing. You do it in increments, and depending on how comfortable you are, you can do bigger increments. If you're uncomfortable, if you're doing this for the first time, you can do it in like 2-inch segments. That's what I would recommend. The things you want to watch out for are, of course, your lines. We are gonna come in here and cut out all these holes and stuff like that. All of this has got to be pressed down, straight down to the board when we glue it, and there does not need to be any air pockets. I always make my first line pretty small. And then you're going to do it on your foam. I'm gonna go even though I know I've got a lot of hangover, I'm gonna go almost all the way to that line. You definitely wanna be careful not to spray it on your new headliner. And honestly, by the time you've gotten through your line, they're pretty much ready to be stuck together. But you don't stick them at once, but you don't want them to get dry before you stick them together either. It's a little bit of an art. I don't know how many seconds, but if you can count the seconds while you're doing something this fiddly, then you can sure try. But I just kind of play it by ear. Trying our best to remember where our contours are, pressing them in. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but we've pressed in our contours right here, and you can almost see the outline of where that light is going to go. It can be highly difficult to get this to stick down around the edges. It might not be sticky all the way around it, but that light is going to hold it in. Whatever the cutout is for, that piece has an overlap and is going to hold that spot in, so you don't want to worry too much about it. And that is our first line. Now I'm going to flip it around and we're going to work in the opposite direction now. So we're going to fold this over. Actually helps to kind of give yourself some folds like this so that you can grab it faster. Fold it over until we feel some resistance, and I'm feeling some resistance right there. So that's where we're gonna start. You wanna make sure you spray it up in between these corners because obviously I haven't gotten there. And if I just treated it like a straight line, I wouldn't be getting that foam in that area. Make sure we get up in there. Pulling up a little bit, not enough to pull it off, but pulling up just a little bit. And then we're gonna get our foam. Now we're just gonna roll it gently down and push it down. And you wanna start from where you've already glued and push down. So going this way down so that you don't get any, see right there, it's trying to glue down a little much to this way, so I had to pull it back a little bit. Sorry about the words, I'm bad with words. So we're just pulling it down. You don't want to work too quickly or your glue won't really get much of a chance to stick down. So I can tell I haven't glued down here. I can see it over there too. So when I roll this back, I need to make sure, but I did glue right here and it's stuck down. So when I roll it back, I need to make sure I get these pockets. As we're getting to this part, I've got to be super careful of this, make sure all the fabric goes in where it needs to go so I don't end up with any bubbles. As well as these pockets up in here and right here, I need to pay a lot of attention to this, so I will probably spray down and work on this first instead of this side. I think I'm gonna do a smaller line so I get a little bit more control if something goes wrong. I'm actually going to move around here and do it this way instead, since this is getting fiddly over here. I'm just moving my hands down the line. So you can see we're getting some crease lines here. That's totally fine. Just need to pull them out a little bit. I don't do these every day, so I'm not gonna get them perfect. And if you're doing this for the first time, you're not gonna get it perfect either, but it's gonna be pretty darn good, and it's gonna be a lot better than a sagging headliner, so. Okay, now we're gonna pull it back again. And again, I still need to make sure I'm paying attention to these pockets, see that all the way through. I've still got this going on, so I'm gonna take it slow, do a smaller line again. Uh-oh, got a line. There we go. That was a little crisis right there. That was a little touch and go, but we got it. This is being a little bubbly, so that's kind of disappointing, but it's worse to try to rip it up and glue it back down, so we're not gonna do that. It's gonna be okay because the handle that goes here is gonna keep it attached anyway. Roll it back again. Oh, I don't like that very much. I actually never had crease lines before, so I'm not extremely happy with that. But again, once you glue it down, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. As you work, you're gonna get the headliner glue kind of on your gloves a little bit. If it's starting to get too much and it's hanging up on your headliner material, you wanna replace those gloves. And this gets a lot easier when you have less fabric. Not sure if you can tell, but I'm catching some of these stretches or extra fabric lines quickly as I'm pushing it down, and I'm pulling them out, stretching them before it dries too much. It's a little bit pliable, but you don't want to pull it enough to rip it, and you really only got seconds. So it's not extremely relaxing work, but it is pretty rewarding. This is our last line, and thankfully it doesn't have a whole lot of curves to it. Came out with a few creases around this handle, but overall, I'm pretty pleased with this. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to trim it, but give it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of extra. I'm gonna glue it down as best as I can. I'm not gonna glue it down like I glued this down. I'm just gonna tack it down a little bit. When the headliner goes in, it'll have this nice, perfect line. Of course, it won't show, but it won't ever fall. So I flipped it over, tacked down the ends a little bit, and now I'm gonna cut out the holes. The first thing I'm gonna do is just put little X's where the holes go, and this is why I flipped it over, is because it's pretty hard to tell what you're doing from the other side. Slit these little holes in every hole, and that'll give me a little bit of wiggle room to get in with a smaller tool and cut around the edges a little bit. Just gonna cut it straight down the middle. I'm gonna use that to give me some slack. And I'm leaving about 1/2 inch around the perimeter, and that is actually how I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to cut it all the way close around the board. I don't want that. I've done it before, and sometimes it gets you into trouble. So I like leaving a little extra on pretty much everything that has to do with the headliner. Honestly, with these squares, I probably won't cut much more than this. It just needs to be big enough for the screw. And I'm really only making it big enough to get the little plastic pieces that went in there through it. I can't get this pair of scissors in here, so I'm gonna have to go with a different tool. I'm gonna come back to that later. That's what it looks like with the holes cut out. It's a good thing to remember which holes go to what fixture. So obviously this is the hole that the light goes in, so that means that it goes in this way. If you put it in the wrong way, that'd be pretty frustrating. So it's good to think about which way it's supposed to go in before you put it in. Pull it out a little bit through here and then stick it back in. And that's it. If you have any comments or suggestions, leave them down in the comments below and we will do our best to get to them. We will also link the tools and supplies needed down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the shop.